So a bit of kumbaya with this session. So let's destroy that now for a moment and get down to tax. Greg, so all working hunky-dory, amazing turnaround in South Australia. But tell me, some people are saying to me it's too fast and there are untoward consequences, like people coming off the scheme, going into disability schemes and so on, and therefore you're just shifting your obligation to another sector.
So I could just...
So whether, actually what I might do, because everybody, so I knew what I was going to do before we started, because nobody over there can see this part, am I right? They can see this part of the scheme. Could you all just move forward in that way a little bit? Because I think that will allow everybody to see everybody. That's great. So has it all happened too fast, and are there untoward consequences of the changes?
Look, I mean, whenever you introduce any new scheme, there are always issues that will crop up. One of the, I think, where the government was quite prudent with the introduction of this scheme is that they've built a review point into the legislation where there has to be a stop point and take stock as to whether or not there were any unintended consequences in the scheme. And I think that's, I think, a very important one, because if you don't actually build that into the legislation, you might actually just not ever get the opportunity to, because for political reasons often you don't get the opportunity to just sit down and take stock. So there is a very precise point in time where, I think it's at 3 years, where the scheme has to be sit down and evaluate it and take stock of whether or not there were any unintended consequences. I mean, I think one needs to take into account the fact that the point that Carol was making was that, you know, even in our scheme that was buggered, as the Minister pointed out, we still had 96% of people that were back at work within 2 years. We had 92% of people back at work within 12 months. Our new scheme actually provides for lifetime care and support for those people that are in that sort of small percentage, and provides them with income support until retirement age, without any of the obligations of the old scheme where they had to be work capacity reviewed. So there's now, for those people that do have I guess, a serious injury, no longer that obligation to have to continue to justify why they should continue to be provided with lifetime care and support. So, look, I think, you know, this, and the old scheme was one that it did actually encourage people to, in effect, stay sick. You know, you stayed sick in order to continue to get your benefits. Whereas good scheme design actually focuses on those issues that encourage people to, and I mean, when I say people, I just don't mean those people that get injured, but I mean their employers as well, to get involved at an early outset and start to you know, to think about what are the things that are creating the barriers to return to work. And I absolutely agree with what Carolyn said about if you get workplaces that understand that people need to be supported right from the moment they get injured, and ideally prevent them from being injured, you know, then you know, this is a good scheme design in that respect.
So we've got a question, how do you do this? So one of the questions on SMS was, how do you do this mobile claims management in a geographically dispersed state?
Well, one of the challenges was to break down that barrier that says that people have to sit behind a desk to manage a claim, which in reality you don't, particularly today with technology. So each of our claims agents, Gallagher Bassett and EML, they have people that are based regionally. So they're actually not based in an office down the road. They're actually based out in the regions, and they have technology that enables them to communicate back with the systems within each of the offices.
And there are enough claims to justify that outposting?
Absolutely. Well, it's always a challenge. What you've got to remember is, I think there was a comment made earlier about case managers having, 85 caseloads of 85. Ours have 25. So we're only talking about, there's only a very small number of claims that actually go beyond 2 weeks. So we're not talking about 100% of our claims here. We're talking about those claims that are likely to be off work for more than a week or two. And at that point, we have 70 I think 2% of our claims. I've looked at these numbers many times where they're back at work within 2 weeks.
Caroline, talk to us about the communications challenge that you threw out. We didn't go into any specifics about how you prepare workplaces for this, how schemes can actually improve their communications and actually avoid some of the anger, hostility and resentment that is the barrier to getting back to work.
For some very bizarre reason, I'm getting asked a lot at the moment to rewrite injury management documentation for companies, which is very bizarre for me because this is not a new topic. And one of the things that had come up was one of the government organisations had asked me to rewrite the language because a worker, still in this day and age, doesn't understand what happens. See, we all take it for granted that we know what's going to happen when there's an injury because it's the world we live in. A worker just goes to work. That's it. And then this injury happens. So the communication system, we have the insurer sending out something completely different to what the organisation is trying to say, to what a manager doesn't know, and then you have the doctor that doesn't know either. So when I'm talking about setting up, communication systems, we have to go right back to the basics of letting everybody understand the process that we are about to go through. We notice that you've had an injury, and the language that we use. Why would you say an injury, you're an injured worker? Welcome, you're an injured worker. We've straight away made them think that they're injured. You know, as opposed to saying, great that you hurt your leg, how can we help you manage back at work? You know, our whole language around communication needs to change.
So what changes there? So tell me how, just play that one out for a moment, the different language.
So the way we've set up our system at the moment, I have an injury, I put in a claim, I'm suddenly referred to by everybody as an injured worker and everyone's going to treat me for my injury. I then go through that process of being managed for my injury, and at no point in time, mental health is another great one. People don't know how to talk about mental health. You know, even the language around, do you feel like you're in control today? Do you feel like you're coping? We treat physical injuries very different to mental injuries, and it all goes back to language and our fear of being connected with people. It happens in the letters that we sent, it happens in the communication that we sent. So there's this lovely domino effect of...
So let's make it tangible. Give us a case study of where it's changed and what the difference it made. What we did with another... I'm trying very careful not to talk about names, but there was another organisation, or injured work, and we changed all the language to managing at work. And what we did was we set up communication packs for the managers so that they were able to say, to give them the, so you gave them a script.
Scripting. Well, the scripting, but also take the fear away. The minute we put fear into injuries, we have then created angry people. Angry people push back at case managers and claims managers. So you need to give people good information so that they understand what's going to happen, take away the fear, and you're able to then reduce that claims experience because people know that this is the process that they're going through.
So presumably, Peter, a lot of your clients are people who are pissed off because of poor communication, I would guess?
It's strange, really. I mean, communication, in the context of being a lawyer, I like poor communication. I think it's a fantastic thing by insurers.
It pays your mortgage.
Because it does, it really does. I mean, a number of people, and poor decision-making, I think, as well, is another critical factor. If you really want to make lawyers well off, make poor decisions on small matters. The number of people that come and see me with they get driven out of complete frustration. Why is the TAC doing this to me? Why won't they pay for my physiotherapy next week? And they're driven to see no one wants to come and see a lawyer. We are regarded as the white pointers. Why would the average person want to come and see us? They're driven to us out of frustration. But the number of those people when they come in who have no idea that they have common law rights, for example. So I often look at these little disputes, people that come in with a $50 argument with TAC that ends up costing the TAC $500,000, and I just think to myself, wow, if only they communicated better and made better decisions.
I'll give you one more example. Long tail claims, fantastic, because it's putting all the energy into early intervention is wonderful. And then we have schemes that have really long tail. So I was asked about 18 months ago to do something with this tail. And I said, that's fine, don't give me any rules, as long as I don't have the rules. And what I did was I phoned each individual worker and I said, I've been assigned to your case and I'd like to meet you. Where do you want to meet? And that for people is, particularly if you've been in tail for 15 to 20 years, is a horrifying question. And then they'll say, McDonald's. McDonald's and I have gone into close partnership now. And it's a safe place. It's like Switzerland for people. And then I'll get to the interview, I say, what would you like to drink? And they're going, what do you mean? I get to choose? So I've given them choice where to meet. I asked them to choose what they'd like to drink. And
admittedly within a limited menu, but anyway.
It's never going to... But they will pay for themselves first time round because they're that angry and frightened. I guarantee you within a couple of weeks, they're starting to communicate. The engagement is so high, they're buying lunch and they've gone back to work. The ability to get long tail from zero into capacity back to work just by giving them choices is incredible. And control.
So moving to Burger King is a success outcome, is it?
That's right.
There's a question for you here from which is your example of 10-minute morning tea and 6-minute stretch is very interesting. What about the more digitally connected workforce that may not, or the gig economy where people are more transient in the workplace, getting that sort of stability? So that's kind of an environment for yesteryear rather than more modern workplaces.
There has to be a balance. It's amazing. I, from time to time, have the opportunity to sit on the insurance floor and just listen to case managers. And the fear of particularly young people to just pick up a phone and talk to someone. And they'll go, no, but I emailed them. And I sent them a fax and I haven't heard back. We need to be able to use technology to be able to increase our level of connection as opposed to using it as a way of saying, well, I sent them a text and we're not connected now.
I'm talking about within the workplace. I'm talking about now, not the insurance workplace, but the general workplace. The point that you were making was that you had a connected group of people who felt in control of the workplace, who were developing and fertile, and many workplaces. So that's a healthy workplace.
But that's just giving people. That's giving people. So the business that we've got, I've got a health and wellness manager in Queensland. I've got people in Victoria and New South Wales. We don't have an office, but our ability to stay connected is very high. The amount of apps that you can use allows you to be connected in a way and across so many different levels, but you need to be able to have that flexibility. Workplaces have to be flexible to be able to allow connection to happen without that face-to-face. We have this app called, have anyone heard of Slackbot? It's the best thing I've ever had. You can have all the different jobs that are going all around Australia. Everyone is connected, and everyone gets to see. So it's this little chat thing for your workplace, but connected to a job, which,
Andrew, one of the issues that you're confronting, isn't it, in New South Wales, is lower severity of claims with increased legal representation. What's going on there?
Okay. Obviously,
Peter's thinking of opening an office in New South Wales. Probably Liverpool or Campbelltown, if I understand correctly.
Yes. Obviously, our actuaries have been briefing you really well. Yes, that's the New South Wales story at the moment. Our scheme is under stress, and I guess that's the underlying issue behind some of the points I was making in the talk. Our scheme has seen prices go up about 70% since 2008. There's a range of factors for that, low yield rates, for example, but the primary driver at the moment is a large upswing in claims frequency, which has been occurring really since that time. But it's been growing exponentially in the last 18 months or so.
Why?
Well, they're legally represented claims, so...
Why? I should ask why five times before you get the real answer.
Well, I think it's a range of factors. I don't think it's one silver bullet. I think we're seeing a whole lot of factors occurring at once where we've now had national laws that have deregulated legal advertising. In New South Wales now, when I listen to the radio each morning, I hear an insurance company exhorting you to buy their green slip before the news, and then after the news you hear the story about the ad for the law firm to go and use their services when you're then battling the insurance company. And all of that is fully paid for by your green slip scheme. So that's part of it. We're seeing a growth in claims farming type activities. We're seeing just a really sort of word of mouth starting to go around in community areas, and a lot of that's to do with the nature of design, bringing it back to questions of design. We run a lump sum system. It's not like the TAC system. People get into the lump sum culture and they can go out there and negotiate to get really large sums of money. And as that gathers strength, it becomes like a snowball. And so the more people hear that, the more it grows. And yes, it did start in some suburbs of Sydney, but we're now seeing that trend more generally.
So underlying that, I'm not necessarily going to ask you to comment, given the difficult position. Why should I care? But you know what, I'm doing it anyway. But it's underlying
Q&A, isn't it?
But underlying that is there is an assumption that there's a proportion that's fraud, and that's dangerous for claimants elsewhere because you move into punitive mode, which penalises everybody, and you don't move towards this more open control focus that you know is the best way to practice. Yeah. How do you balance those two policies? And I might get Greg to comment as well, and Peter.
Look, it's a great question, and it is tricky. As part of our change, I'll start by talking about the things we've been working with our insurance companies on, and it's been shifting to a more principles-based approach to claims management. We've been working on a whole new framework that puts the customer at the centre of the relationship. And that's absolutely the right thing to do. But that's against a framework where we're seeing mounting claims coming into the system. Now, where I have to be careful in what I say is that there's fraud and there's fraud. We've historically had low propensity to claim in the New South Wales scheme. We're seeing a growth in propensity. Is that people coming in who have had an accident who are now making a claim that in the past wouldn't have done?
And which for they've got every right to make.
In which case they've got every right and they should be treated appropriately. Or is it fraud? Or is it exaggeration? Is it phantom people in cars and things like that? So the reality is it's probably a bit of all of those things. And so we are challenged by sending mixed messages to the insurance companies that we regulate, that on the one hand we want them to be more customer centric, but on the other hand we want you to hold the line. And so what we're doing there is using data and analytics. We've had a large project of working with all of our insurance companies to really understand what's going on and develop some red flags, to develop some ways of identifying particular claims that when they come in, if they meet a range of these flags, then have a closer look. If they're not, then you should work on a proposition that this is going to be legitimate unless proven otherwise. So it's very much using data and analysis as a way of segmenting the market.
And how broad do you go in terms of acquiring that data? Because there's data outside your environment that could inform it.
Absolutely. The aim is to use a whole range of data. So part of our data analytics is cross-linking into police data. We cross-link into hospitals data. We cross-link into the Centre for Road Safety's data. So we've established now a fully linked database that allows us to see the trends beyond what we're seeing in the insurance sphere and use that business intelligence, data intelligence, to feed into some understandings about, well, what's going on with claims. So if hospitalisations are steady but claims are going up, what's going on here?
But you suggested you've got algorithms about individuals as well from your data analytics.
We are not so much individuals, but I guess what we're developing is ways of seeing particular trends, particular types of injury that's occurring. So it's not necessarily a particular individual that we might target, but it's more a trend that's emerging.
So Greg, this issue of concern about manipulation of the system versus having the open customer-focused system that Caroline and I think the whole panel agrees is the way to go.
Well, I think
that tension.
Well, that's right. Look, certainly that's what we're trying to drive with the, I guess, the service approach that we've introduced over the last 18 months or so, and more specifically from the beginning of this year with, for example, the mobile case management model, with our trying, I guess, to move away from, and I know I said it earlier, but really it is look, the vast majority of claims that you get are genuine claims where what you need to do is to get in there early and treat those people with respect. And again, I'm talking about both employers and injured workers, because they both feel like they don't get heard. So to get in there early, recognise that it is a no-fault system. Yes, you do have to meet certain criteria in order to have your claim paid, but what we're recognising here is that the vast majority of people have got genuine injuries that need to be understood, and that the focus really needs to be on those.
So keep the focus on that, and the other things fall by.
That's right. So if you support those people early, you get in, and that's where if you think about what you said about employers needing to provide that support, we've got 50,000 employers in this scheme. I think it's 46,000 of them pay less than $10,000 in premium. They have a claim once every 15 years. When they have a workplace injury, they just don't know what to do, and they don't know how to support their injured workers. So what we're doing with our service model is that we're getting in early, focusing on, what's the injury, what's the diagnosis, and what's the prognosis for what we need to do to go forward, rather than focusing on, are we liable and what's the extent of the disability. So it's a mindset shift, and that's how you change. I noticed a question came up here earlier, how do you change that mindset? That's how you do it. You shift that mindset away from liability and disability. Yes, you do have to understand, are we liable? But if you're in there early working with people, eyeballing people, they understand that what you're there to do is to help them. And, if it makes it a bit uncomfortable for the odd person that, maybe wanting to have an interview, is that a problem? I don't think so. It's about providing support early to people in workplaces to help them understand what it is they need to do to be able to move on with their lives.
Just a quick comment about that balance here between sort of punitive defensiveness and getting out there.
Yeah, look, it is. I recognise that it's a real problem for schemes, probably more CTP, pure common law schemes, I suspect, than the hybrids and the no-faults. Although you do get some element of fraud on the no-fault side of things. I mean, it is a difficult balance, I think. My view about what you said before is that it sounds awfully like Victoria 1985-86 to me, the precursor.
That's what Victorians always say about New South Wales.
Look, New South Wales is a very strange place. I mean, it's a very litigious state compared to Victoria. So I recognise that there are differences, and there obviously are differences between states. I mean, the differences are fascinating. For example, in Tasmania, why would pain and suffering damages for a quadriplegic max out at $250,000 compared to Victoria at $518,000? I mean, what is it about Bass Strait that affects the mindset of those people who assess damages?
Don't get me on Tasmania. So just on this, why don't we have more national consistency, that challenge that Peter threw out?
It's getting people to agree what that national consistency should look like. That's the challenge. It's proven, I think, achievable to have a national consistency when it comes to health and safety, but because of the quite extreme variances in particularly benefit packages across work injury insurance schemes, it's been very difficult to try and get that alignment. Look, I think there is a solution to it, not for discussion now, but it is a challenge, I think, to try and align, unless someone was just prepared to come in and say this is what it's going to be. But
So another question from you off the SMS was, you've done a lot of changes all at once. How do you know which ones are working and which are worth the money?
Well, it is always a challenge. Look, there's no doubt that in terms of the pure financial side of it, the data will give you pretty sort of unequivocal evidence as to what's happening at a particular point in time in terms of duration, outcomes, and cost outcomes. But the service outcome is a much more difficult one to measure, and that's equally as important in a scheme. It's not just about the dollars, it's about ensuring people get the service that they need to feel that they've benefited from the scheme. That's more challenging, and you need to do that in more real time. We've recently introduced a concept called Net Promoter Score. Called Net Promoter Score. There are many of these around. I mean, many of you'd be familiar when you bring up Telstra and next thing you know, you're getting somebody on the phone to tell you how we went. Well, that real-time information about how you went when you dealt with, an injured worker or an employer becomes really important to whether or not you're actually meeting the service expectations that the scheme's meant to correct. So there's both the objective with the data, and the data can tell you financially how you're going, whether you're achieving your return to work goals, but equally what's important is are you providing good service? And that's more challenging to do.
And what are your litigation metrics looking like?
At the moment, they're improving dramatically under the new scheme, but there was an escalation in getting understanding how to manage the old scheme, but the new scheme will prove to be, I think, much more effective in eliminating many disputes. There are many more, there are less disputable opportunities in the new scheme. There are, the clear ones, such as the gateway to entry or getting onto the scheme. Obviously, whole person impairment. There's always going to be some issues around that, but in the main, there are less clear opportunities to dispute. We no longer have work capacity reviews, for example. There are no work capacity reviews in the current scheme. That eliminates a massive amount of disputes in the scheme.
So Caroline, the question here was from again SMS was, do case managers understand the balance of when face-to-face is more appropriate or phone, and how to handle issues, objections and barriers on each medium, and how to
I'm going to
triage
say
this?
Possibly not. One of the issues is that a case manager, everything is driven by money. So a person who comes in as a case manager for many of the various organisations, they really need to be good at numbers and managing a claim, and that's a very different skill set to being able to manage a case and the psychological component of case management. You can get that together, but that becomes expensive. And if you are trying to, organisations are then trying to balance, do they put the money into that mixed set of skills, or do we have two different sets of skills? A good case manager that can pick up on the psychological components of a claim is going to have a very different understanding to just managing a claim. Some people do that right, some people don't, but that is where some of the clunkiness comes.
Question here is, Peter is a clear advocate of allowing restricted common law. How do the others view common law as part of the design?
I'm not an advocate for it. Common law, it comes down to, Peter did actually say it in his, it comes down to, finding the balance of affordability in schemes. If you're going to have a no-fault scheme, I think that what you really need is to take that common law breeds adversarial relationship, and particularly in a workplace injury scheme where really what you're wanting is that relationship between an employer and an injured worker to be harmonious. The moment you introduce a fault or common law, that relationship breaks down, and any hope you might have of getting people back to work disappears. It's a difficult one. Everybody has their own views on it. There's no wrong or right answer.
Andrew, you're in common law hell, aren't you?
Common law hell, yeah. There are extremes of common law, yeah. Look, I think Peter hit the nail on the head, and I've in fact made a similar comment at the last injury scheme seminar, which is that in motor accident schemes in particular, more so than workplaces, the concept of fault is a much more powerful thing, and I think in workplaces there's kind of a master-servant relationship, if you go back sort of into industrial politics, where people regard your employer as somehow obligated to look after you, even if you're doing something stupid while you're doing it, because you're on their time. When you're on the road, the duty of care is between two people who are equal, they're peers. And when people do the wrong thing on the roads, and they injure somebody else, that creates this sense that they've caused something to me, which is kind of, goes back to the origins in tort, etc. And it is deeply ingrained. The first thing people will say, it's exactly to Peter's fault, comment, who was at fault? I had a crash on my way home from work. First question, somebody will say, whose fault was it? So it is deeply ingrained. It does create adversarialism, and that at its extreme, and I think we're seeing that in New South Wales, can then fray at the edges. My personal view is it's very hard to remove completely from schemes, and I think it's why places like TAC continue to operate it side by side.
So you said you could speak for half an hour on the faults of the TAC. You've got 90 seconds.
I don't like the AMA guides. I think the guide is a blunt instrument. It produces unfair outcomes, and that's because it doesn't assess disability. I could give examples. You could have two people in an intersectional accident, two motorbike riders. One loses their leg below the knee and gets a 28% whole person impairment. The other loses an arm at the elbow and gets a 60% impairment. The legless man is a manual worker. The fellow who loses the arm is a lawyer. If you then set the delivery of long-term benefits based upon, say, a 50% impairment level, the fellow who will never work again won't get onto it, and the lawyer who's lost the arm will never need it. To me, it's not a very good way to deliver benefits to people who need them.
But you've got to set rules, haven't you?
Well, I can understand the appeal of the AMA guys, because I think they make the life of the actuary easier, because you can in fact look at a statistical database and make predictions about what future costs will be.
So you're actually asking actuaries to consider people here, are you?
Well, that's what I'm trying to do, indeed. I appreciate
a bit
how
radical, but
challenging it is.
we'll work on it.
Thank you. There are other aspects of it as well. There's no such thing as the perfect scheme. It's really about the level of imperfection. And so I could talk about imperfections of the TAC scheme, but I think that they pale against the imperfections of most of the other schemes that I've seen around the country.
A question here about the $753 billion a year. I think it was Caroline who put that up. 32,000 per head is the sort of amateur, is the maths that's been done. I won't say it's amateur, there's nothing amateur but maths in this room. What are the main drivers of this cost? Andrew?
Well, I guess their workplace injuries, I think, was the stat that was there. But I guess it's ultimately about prevention, and these, the schemes that we operate are a reflection of the cost when prevention fails, and we need to take an end-to-end view when we look at the risk management of these systems. I think when we look at injury schemes, we often look at them in their isolation. We look at the little box and the rules and the way they operate. But the reality is they operate in end-to-end systems, from prevention through to all of the different support systems that we have in society that help people when they're recovering from injury. And when you aggregate all of that, you start to see this really incredible cost. And we as scheme leaders can play a role in looking at that end-to-end viewpoint and influencing other areas, influencing in the road safety space or influencing in work health and safety in other areas to try and minimise cost. And at each point, what you're trying to do is minimise cost to moving to the next stage, if I can put it that way. And so as scheme leaders, we need to have that broader view in my view.
So there was an earlier question there for you, Andrew, which was about the interest in this shared database, that you've got these silos together now talking to each other. Well, I've got one question of my own, coming from the health background. You can't get silos talking to each other because of privacy legislation. which would be incredibly useful for improving people's health and well-being. How have you managed to do it, and are you going to share it with anybody else?
Yeah, well, the privacy issues are an issue, obviously, in terms of it's not the sort of thing you publish on a website somewhere. But we're looking at it more at aggregate data, so what it allows us to do is to look at trends, look at analysis around what's going on between those systems. It is possible to drill down to an individual level, but primarily that's not what we're doing it for. We're using that information to act as an information broker, if you like, so that we can work with our insurers to get them to understand better what's going on.
So they'll be using their own data analytics to increase their margins and so on. How do the two interact? And they've obviously got data that could help you. So how does that work?
Sure. Well, our role as a regulator is to fill a gap where insurance companies, where they're operating individually, they'll have their own commercial data, their own commercial in confidence data. They can't always share that. And they're not always going to see some of the super trends that are starting to emerge, particularly those with a smaller market share. So what we're doing more and more of as a regulator is to fulfil a role where we are able to help get information be shared between and across insurers, including aggregate data, in a way that isn't breaking commercial confidences that those insurers would otherwise have if they tried to do it themselves in sharing information.
Can you give us insights, Greg, into how you're using data and where you're getting it from?
Well, we don't have access to the broader breadth of data.
So the South Australian Police aren't quite so forthcoming?
No. Well, we also don't need access to that data, but we certainly have very rich data in our scheme. One thing that when Return to Work SA was WorkCover, it did a tremendous job of actually collecting data about the scheme. Didn't do a very good job about using that data to understand what was going on in the scheme. But our data is very rich. We have a very skilled team of actuaries and analysts within our business that actually use that data. We've invested very heavily.
Can you give us an example of an insight you've got from it that you didn't have before? There's
some of the information that you get. Well, for example, one of the things that we're doing at the moment is that the way we're working with treatment, for example, and understanding the extent to which treatment's being used in the scheme. So, for example, how many? Well, I was going to ask a question, but I won't. I'll just simply say this: we reviewed a particular. I won't sort of denigrate one particular service profession, but it was medical, wasn't doctors. Providing a.
You're not going to have a go at orthopaedic surgeons.
No,
disappointing.
No,
yeah.
But the amount of treatments for this particular type of activity was, we had a list that was that long of people over 2 years that were getting more than 700 treatments. So the data then enabled us to identify. The data then enabled us to identify who those were, what type of claims they were. So we now have we've gone out and gotten people within that particular profession who are considered to be, superior in that profession, and they go out and engage one-on-one with those providers to talk about, tell me why it is that this particular individual over the last 2 years has needed over 700 treatments. So the data can be really useful in helping you understand where the anomalies are in your scheme. And that activity saved us nearly $30 million. Didn't cost us very much to do it, but it saved us nearly $30 million. And what it's enabled us to do is to then focus on, well, if it's obviously not working, what is it that we can do for you? And we've then taken that then on to develop some second opinion medicine options, for examples, that then can support people moving away from the IME style. So it's been really useful in helping us develop the tools that we need and to have the conversations that we need to understand why certain things happen. That's what I mean about actively managing a scheme. That's what we do. We're very active in understanding what's going on and then getting up, and out and...
So if 80% of benefits was unacceptable, what's the optimal level of benefits in the long term?
Well, it wasn't 80% of benefits. What the scheme
So
was
80% of award income.
we're paying 80% of award income until retirement age. And unfortunately, when you have a scheme that is designed that way, and it was the only one of its type in the world, it's very expensive, and it does make... you've got to find that balance. I think Peter was saying it earlier. You've got to find the balance between affordability and fairness. But by design, it actually... people end up being, we used to say people stayed sick on our scheme. Well, they stayed sick in order to stay on benefits. Whereas if you design the scheme that actually has people focusing on, what I need to do is take advantage of the support that I'm getting in order to get well. And as I said, our data showed us that about 96% of people are back at work within 2 years, and the seriously injured have a different level of support. What I think people probably don't understand about the new scheme in South Australia is that we didn't introduce common law. There was a consideration to introduce common law, but what we did was we used our actuaries very smartly to think about what would common law cost at the threshold that it was going to be introduced in, and it was significant amount of money. What would it be if we turned that around? Unfortunately, we do use WPI assessment, and instead of actually having people have to have a blue with their boss, to stay sick in order to maximise, pay half their money to a lawyer. Sorry, Peter. What if we turned that around and said we gave it to, we made an economic lump sum component available to those injured workers who are not seriously injured, so those under 30%, and took that money and said to people, you don't need to stay sick to get access to it. You can be back at work, working full time, but you'll get this additional, above your normal lump sum that we pay. So there was ordinarily already a WPI lump sum there, but there's this additional amount that was originally valued by the actuaries for common law that was not gotten rid of, just transferred to any injured worker who is under 30% whole person impaired gets access to this additional lump sum to take into account the fact that, beyond the 2 years that they might need some additional treatment, they might need some more time off work. Now, for somebody who's 29% whole person impaired, that's nearly $450,000, over and above what they would have ordinarily got as a WPI. So it's not just 2 years of compensation for those people not seriously injured. It's 2 years plus this...
Getting rid of disincentive.
This lump sum component that people are entitled to take into account future needs. So that's never, or often not, described when people talk about or people actually probably don't even realise that's there. So this scheme has been designed quite fairly, and what it's done is it's taken into consideration that ultimately people actually don't want to be sitting on a workers' compensation scheme for the rest of their lives. They want their life back.
So the messages I've got from today is change is inevitable and continuous. Sustainability is always a challenge. You can never rest on your laurels. You can have the best design system in the world, but if you've got crap management, it's not going to work very well, and the design is going to become out of date anyway. And you've got to get that marry of the two, and never forget about the person at the centre, and that communication is what's going to kill you in the end. Please thank our panellists.